Hello and welcome to Christians United Broadcasting Network. You can reach us at www.christiansunited.tk. Your host today will be Mr. Brian Wilson, the radio preacher man. You can get in touch with him at www.radiopreacherman.tk. Enjoy the chat room and have some fun learning the Word of God. Amen. Hi, and welcome to the RPM show, Revelations Per Minute, with your host, Brian Wilson, as we'll teach you all about the revelations in the Word of God. And also, I'd like to thank Brian Wilson for showing up on CUBN, being part of the CUBN family at Christians United Broadcasting Network. Revelations Per Minute, ladies and gentlemen. Your host, Mr. Brian Wilson. Thank you, Jesus, for bringing us this wonderful man to Christians United Broadcasting Network, where he'll teach everyone the Word of God. Radio preacher man, Brian Wilson. Amen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Radio Preacher Man. You're listening to Revelations Per Minute on the Cuban Network, CUBN, Christians United Broadcasting Network. And I'm glad to be here with you. And tonight we have a guest who's called in a few times from across the pond there. Rabbi Simon Altaf is with us. And Simon is presently ordained as a rabbi and involved in active Muslim-Christian dialogue, bringing current knowledge of dealing with Muslim objections to the Hebrew faith, and also the knowledge of who the real Hebrews of the Bible were and where they are likely today. And the God of Israel is again returning to his chosen people and interested in the house of Judah and the house of Ephraim in the exile after their punishment is over, to reveal to them who they are for their restoration in mind, body, hallelujah, followed by the land in the end when the impostors will be removed. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with that said, we're going to talk to Simon Altaf here tonight. Simon has also been working in a project to retranslate the Bible from all three sources via Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, using his Afrocentric knowledge to pull the different tongues together. So we are going to see what's happening now with Simon Altaf. How are you, Simon?
Good, thank you, Pastor Brian. How are you?
Yes, good. Good to see you and hear you and those kind of things again. Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, yes. Now, look at here. We're talking about tonight the real chosen people. Amen.
That's right. So I'm going to be looking at covering especially information such as 1948. You know, when Israel was created, was it created by God's hand or was it by men's hands?
Yes, interesting. That's a great area of study, I'm sure, because I'm very interested in knowing about the land of Israel. What are your thoughts on that? Where shall we begin?
Well, I mean, presently, if we look at the present situation of Israel, as you know, the present government that's there, they've earmarked something like between 50 to 60,000 refugees who are in the country to be deported back to their countries, and majority of those refugees have come from Sudan, of all countries, and you know, the whole world knows that Sudan has been at war, not just, you know, from last year. It has been at war for over 25 years now, and finally Sudan has split into North and South Sudan, and it is these people who come from Sudan that are at risk in Israel, who are being beaten up over there by the Zionist Jews who call them Zionists, who call themselves chosen, which they are not, and their shops are being burned. You know, they are being murdered in the streets. That's the kind of, you know,
in Israel?
Israel. Israel is no different to how the Jews would be in Germany in 1941, 1942, when these things were happening there through Hitler and his Nazi army.
I did not know this. So these people, 50 to 60,000 refugees, they are of Jewish descent, I presume, and they've made Aliyah. Is that correct?
No, let me give you the history of Sudan. Sudan, basically, these black people who come out of Sudan are actually more Jews than all the Jews put together in Israel, because originally the Israelites, and one has to understand, Israel as a nation was a nation in Africa, in Northeast Africa, not in some European state. So the people who inhabited Israel were black people. Abraham was a black man. He was a man whose family belonged to the tribe of basically people called the Fula people. These people were nomads. They were people who were wanderers. They wandered in West Africa, and Abraham's family traveled from West Africa to be in southeast Turkey, where Abraham was born, and then he was basically called in to Israel. So if we trace that history back, and if we move forward, one has to ask the question that all of historical evidence shows that the chosen people were black or people of color. Then how come that in 1948, when Israel is reclaimed, that all the people who return, majority of those people are of Caucasian color and Russian and Europeans, basically Ashkenazi, Sephardi. These people, Ashkenazi, are the sons of Ashkenaz that are mentioned in the Bible as the sons of Japheth. So, we'll look at that. But the people in Sudan, we have historical evidence of people like Josephus, Flavius, who wrote history during the Roman period when the Messiah was alive, and after his death and resurrection as well, that he said that many of our people at that time, they fled into what is today known as West Africa, and also into North Africa, into the Atlas Mountains. He also said that our people fled into Sudan, and they actually built a kingdom there. So the name Sudan basically comes from the Hebrew word Odu. Odu, the word from the Hebrew language, it relates back to Yehudah, Judah. So these people are likely, 99% chance of these people are going to be their real Israelite people. Yet they have become the refugees. And the ones who were refugees in Russia have become the owners of the land. That's kind of how the game is flipped. So today, the people who come over there, the black people who are more than likely the real progenitors of that land, and ones who live there, they are the foreigners today and being chanted against as Negroes and get out of here, and the kind of things that we are so used to with Ku Klux Klan in America and in other countries, in European countries, where there's been racist acts against the black populations generally. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the East St. Louis massacre in July 1st, 1917, when a whole population of people who were Caucasoid, American white people who were linked in with the Ku Klux Klan, they kind of banded together and they started to kill the blacks, destroy their businesses, and burn their houses and businesses down.
Lord.
And that's the kind of scenario that we're talking about, where systematically people were murdered, killed. And I don't know if you know that the black people who are in America today, who call themselves Michael, Jordan, whatever their different names are, these people are Israelite people. They're chosen people. They were brought over there by slavery, through transatlantic slavery. And this is slavery that basically was started, would you believe it or not, by Caucasian Jews. It was started by Sephardic Jews. And the Sephardic Jews...
What did you call that? What kind of Jew?
There were Sephardic Jews. Sephardic Jews are those Jews who basically came out of Portugal and Spain. And I'll brief you on the history of a man that many people know and don't really have much understanding of. This is a person called Christopher Columbus.
Yeah.
Christopher Columbus, if you remember, they cite him as the one who discovered America. However, that's not entirely true, because before Christopher Columbus got there, everybody knows that Red Indians were living in America. They were the indigenous populations who were systematically removed by the Europeans after Christopher Columbus entered America. And Christopher Columbus also is a person who was a Marrano Jew. He's definitely not chosen either. He was a Spanish guy. He was a person who went over to Ghana at that time. He was the one who orchestrated slavery in Ghana in order to extract gold from there that they had found in Ghana, because you know part of Ghana is called the Gold Coast as well. And so he then took that information back. He gave it to the Portuguese people. It was the Portuguese that went over, took their slave ships, and then they started to enslave people systematically and bringing them back. Now, a lot of these Portuguese people that have Portuguese names, and they sound like European names, they sound like they are European residents, and yes, they were European residents, but these were Jews. They had dual names. So one of the famous names is Aaron Lopez, of a man who was extremely rich, who owned many, many slave ships. He was a resident of Rhode Island in America, and he primarily, that was his trade. And he wasn't the only one. There were many, many others, which I've documented in my book called The Second Exodus, World War III, The Second Exodus, in which I describe the true Israelites' return journey home, which is yet to happen. So in there I talk about information where the people that the Christians are today ignorantly raising up in Israel, the Caucasian people that came out of Russia, they are no more than Gentiles. They're not chosen people. And everybody in that region knows that the people who originally inhabited the land, who were called Israelites, even people before Israelites, like the Canaanites, all these people were black races.
Well, now,
you know, there are important information. There's very, very important information in the Bible, which has sometimes been deliberately omitted, removed, to remove traces of those kinds of people. For instance, in the book of Genesis, there is a very key genealogy missing.
And this is missing even in the King James Version, because the King James Version.
Every Bible that you have out there, except the Hidden Truths, Hebraic Scrolls, the one that I translated, has that genealogy in it.
Because most people.
So one then has to ask the question, why did they take the genealogy out?
Yes, most people say the King James Version. Very, very, very almost to the word translated from the original Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic.
That is not entirely accurate, Pastor Brian, because the King James Version, although is touted to be translated from the Hebrew, but you have to understand the text came from the Masoretes. And now this Masoretes, a lot of people don't even know who the Masoretes are, but I'll tell you who the Masoretes are. The Masoretes were people who came out of Russia. These people were converts into Judaism, and a lot of these people were what we call Karaite Jews today. Now, one has to understand that every instance, and we're not just talking about here the instance of the word Lord in your Bibles or the word God. We are talking about other texts in the Bible that was deliberately omitted and removed, and we only found out the text was removed. Obviously, this work was done between the 6th to the 10th century CE, after the death and the resurrection of the Messiah, this side of AD. We have to understand that we actually only uncovered these kinds of things once the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1947. We didn't know that before that, did we?
No.
So therefore, when we had checked the Dead Sea Scrolls, when the scholars had went back, even now, many of the Dead Sea Scrolls have not been revealed. They are still kept hidden and secret. Very little information on the Dead Sea Scrolls has come out in the last 50 years. What has come out has revealed that the changes that were made by the Masoretes have been now exposed and revealed, because we know that they changed the name of God from, for instance, Yahweh Yud-Heh Vav-Heh to Lord. That change was made, and then if the Christian translators were so accurate, like the King James Bible translators themselves, one has to ask the question, is why did they not put the name Yahweh there as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh? If they were so accurate, why make such a silly mistake like that? That means that those people deliberately copied what the so-called Jews, that is not Ashkenazim, not the real chosen people, but those who called themselves the chosen, had done. So they had copied them verbatim, and we know that because there are certain traditions that are followed by the Ashkenazi, and those traditions were copied verbatim in the Bible as well, in the King James Bible. Those traditions could not have been known by the King James 44 translators, 47, between 44 to 47 translators. So we know that that's not the case. However, we find that, the information that was put in there was obviously cross-referenced by the Jewish canon that existed at the time. Because, this is where we have the issues with William Tyndale, who was a Christian believer. William Tyndale knew the Hebrew language, knew the Greek language. He was a very good scholar. And William Tyndale was the one who had issues with some of the Bible translations as well, because he also translated the Bible, if you know.
Yes.
And he then put back a lot of information. He did a fairly good translation with what he had, and it's quite funny because William Tyndale at that time knew that the word church was from paganism, and a lot of Christians don't know that today even.
Well, I know there's some pagan roots in some of the things that we do with even the holidays and such. But what exactly was missing from the text you started to tell us in about the 6th to 10th century? Is it just they changing the name of God in those instances?
Not just the name, Pastor Brian. There were other things omitted as well. For instance, God a lot of the times spoke anthropologically like a human being does, of his eyes, of his ears, of his nose, of his hands. And there were instances which I've documented in the Hidden Truths Hebraic Scrolls where, for instance, God speaks about his nose, or he might say something about his hand, or might say something about his eyes. Obviously, we know that God as a being is not a human per se. He's not a human being like you and me.
Right.
He is light, he is spirit, he is beyond our understanding. So, yet we know that God in his infinite wisdom created, sent the Messiah who was cloaked with the heavenly dust, who we saw as a human being. Now, that's as much, as close as we can get to God in terms of God, because we cannot see the source of what God really is. We're not privy to that. However, saying that, what we found with the Messiah was the Messiah that told us that the Father is within him and he's within the Father. In other words, we've seen him.
And we're made in the image of God, as we know.
Yeah, so you've got to be careful, because the word image can also lead to iconology, like an icon. So we've got to be careful how we designate that word. However, having said that, the thing is this with the Masoretes, because they made many changes in the Bible which are not necessarily theological changes, but they are nevertheless changes which can throw people off. They can throw people off because if you remove certain information from the Bible, how do you know that the information is there? Because imagine, people who lived for 2,000 years did not have that information that we received in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. So those people wouldn't have had that information, so how would they have behaved? How would they have reacted if they had found out that certain information was deliberately removed or suppressed?
Yes, that'd be devastating. You're right, to know that things were removed from the Bible. So
therefore, you see, the question then comes is that the canon, obviously this is really a whole different topic of the canon, because the canon that the Constantine Empire, the Roman Empire,
right,
basically established in 325 CE, when they formulated the doctrine of the Trinity. It was at that time that it was decided what books to put in and what books to remove. Now, yes. You can't turn around to me, or anybody can't turn around to me and tell me that Constantine had the right to decide which book to put in and which not to put in. A pagan king decides that for us.
Mm-hmm.
That's that's a little hard to swallow for us, at least Israelites.
Yes. Now, there are also, I agree with you on that I know, and they changed the Sabbath and different things during that time, about 325 during the Nicene Council, and also deciding, like you said, the Bible, what books would be in and what would be out. A lot of people feel like the Book of Enoch is scriptural and should be included, and as well as other books. But getting back to the tribes, there are 12 different tribes of Israelites, of course, the sons of Jacob. Do you feel like these people are of different races and cultures, Simon? The 12 tribes?
It's definitely certain, for sure, that when the 10 tribes were expelled from Israel for their disobedience, when they were sent into the Assyrian Empire, it is for sure that they mixed with different cultures. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are different cultures, but they mixed in with them. So they married into different cultures. They, married into foreign women and other nations. So they kind of became mixed in.
Well, and we know he had more than one wife, too. So they could be. That could be some way of. You know what I mean? The kids could have different skin colors and races, basically, based upon which mother they're from, right?
Not necessarily, because I think you need to understand that one of the things we need to understand, two things. Number one, when the 10 tribes went out into Iran and into Iraq and Assyria, the cities of the Medes and the mountains of the Medes. Now, I don't think many people understand that the mountains of the Medes, that area is a very closed-off area. So very difficult area to get to. It takes months to cross that area, and it's a really dangerous journey. Only a few missionaries have ever made it to that far, and they've gone and met many Nestorian Christians and other people over there who inhabited the land today, or at least, in the 18th century. So one has to understand that the Israelites who were there were predominantly a people of black race, and when they mixed in, and when we look at Iranian history, because Iran borders that region, when we look at Iranian history, ancient history, Iranians were also people of color. They were not people of Caucasian skin color, never were. Even today's Iranians, today's Iranians are a mixture of the Yazidi. The Yazidi people come from Turkey, who are also the sons of Japheth. Japheth, as you know, is the one who basically gave rise to the white races.
So he did what? Japheth did what with the white races?
Japheth basically is a progenitor of Caucasian races.
Okay.
While Shem and Ham are the progenitors of the black races.
Okay, and with that given, you're saying a lot of the people who are claiming to be Israelis who live in Israel even that are Zionists.
Pastor Brian, because here's the reason why. Because let me go over that a little bit, so at least we get an idea of what we're talking about. In 1948, a land was established in Israel. We know that the land belonged to a people called Israel, the 12 tribes. Mm-hmm. Now, these people who went to claim the land, and if you know anything about history, you will know that these people called themselves Zionists. They were Europeans. A lot of these people were Russians, and they were inhabited in not only Russia, but they had inhabited in lots of parts of Germany and other countries. Now, there are Israelite historians today who have written histories of their own people, and even they will tell you that the people who ended up in the land had no clue as to their origins, because they were definitely not chosen as such. These people belonged to different nations. All they knew, they had Jewish names, and we know from documented history that Israel, these people who call themselves Israelites today, they came from a region in Russia that was converted into Judaism, and that region was called Khazaria. Khazaria was a kingdom that bordered Caspian Sea. Khazaria was a huge kingdom, not a small kingdom, and the whole kingdom converted into Judaism. Now, these were Caucasian folks. These were sons of Japheth. And they have documented history. They have documented history of those people in Russia. We have documented history of those people here and in Spain. Now, those people, when that empire was disbanded between the 8th to the 10th century by the Muslims, because they were fighting the Muslims at the time to withhold them from entering those regions. Eventually, when that empire was destroyed, they entered Europe in very, very large numbers. And it is those people who translated the Bible and are called the Masoretes. So we have to link the two together. And when we link the two together and we look at the migration pattern of those people, we find out through their own testimony that those people had told us they were not originally chosen people. They were from a different son of Noah, because the son of Noah that was called Shem, that is where the Israelites are from, Shemites. Whilst the son of Noah that was Japheth, that's where the Caucasian races are from, that inhabited areas of the Caucasus Mountains, and from there they spread out. So therefore we know from the histories, from Jewish sources, not only just European sources, it's Jewish sources, such as Arthur Koestler. There are other professors in Israel who have written these histories, and they tell you that a large number of these people that today call themselves Ashkenazim, they were not chosen as such. They became converted into the faith long ago, and they have just preserved the tradition of the chosen people. Now, we also know that the Sephardic Jews, a lot of those people were involved in slave trade. Now, in the books of the Torah, or the books of Moses, in the 5th book, Deuteronomy chapter 28, we have a whole list of curses that are said to going to be affect real Israel. Now, if one takes a study of those particular curses and also increases, that if they obey God, they will have certain increases. If they do not obey God, they will have certain curses. And if we examine those curses are the ones that state that Israel would never get up again until God gets them up. In other words, they will have no power to raise themselves up when they are disbanded as a people after their disobedience. That is the state that the black Israelites are in today, in America, in Europe, all over the world, wherever they are. They are the poorest people. They are the ones who are incarcerated the most, and they are the ones who are cast names the most. And so therefore, one has to understand that you cannot call chosen to those people who are billionaires. The majority of the billionaires in the world today are Jews. The media is controlled by the Jews. Hollywood is owned by the Jews. Yahweh,
but those are not the same Jews you're referencing. Those are not the Jews you're referencing. Those are maybe the Jews
the Gentiles who call themselves Jews, who are not really chosen, but they call themselves chosen anyway, because
they're
they think
converted
they are.
in. These are the ones that are Masoretes, say.
Yes, there is a prophecy in the book of Genesis chapter 9, verses 26 to verses 27. Again, this is where artistic license comes in your, if you like, the King James Bible, in which they mistranslate the Bible. So therefore it appears to be one thing, yet actually God is saying completely another. Now, most of the Bibles out there that you will reference, and this includes the famous King James Version as well, in Genesis 9:27, it will say something like that it says, God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. Now, if you look at that text from the King James Bible, or maybe the NIV, or perhaps some of the other American translations, you will find that it gives a very different picture. It seems to show that Japheth will become big. He will dwell in the tents, meaning houses of Shem, and Canaan being the son of, depending on which Canaan we're talking about, because there's a missing genealogy here. So let's assume Canaan being from the Cushite line, then son of Ham, then you could say that the blacks would become the slaves, but that's not true because there's a missing genealogy. It creates a whole new confusion. First of all, in Genesis 9:27, the Hidden Truths Hebraic Scrolls, here is how I translated it. Elohim will allow Japheth to be deceived, and he will dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan will become his servant. In other words, Japheth will become deceived to inhabit the land of Israel and will call himself the chosen. That is what's happening in 1948. That was a prophecy that was given through Noah that Moses was recording.
Let me mention real quickly, Simon, if I can, about the Holocaust. We've all seen the horrendous pictures of the Holocaust victims and are all starving and they're going into the furnaces and being burned, and they seem like they're all Caucasian persuasion, all the people in the pictures that they show.
I know. I know that.
And
what about the Black Holocaust?
there was supposed to be 6 million, I think, of them who were I think executed during that.
Right, but let me say something about the Holocaust. Nobody's denying the Holocaust over here. What we are saying is a completely different story. And we cannot deny the Black Holocaust, where 100 million people were displaced from Africa into slavery. That was 10 times more worse than the Jewish Holocaust. Now, Hitler, basically, when he came to do the Holocaust in Germany, he was inspired by what had happened to the blacks. He knew that nobody said anything when the blacks were being enslaved. Then he chose to do the same, knowing that nations are not going to do anything against him either. So he was encouraged by that. And he was encouraged by the writings of people like, as you know, Luther, who was a German preacher, a person who left the Roman Catholic Church and tried to convert
Martin
the Jews
Luther,
tried to convert the Jews into Christianity, and they wouldn't be persuaded. And then he wrote much bad information about the Jews living in Germany and other places. So therefore, that was kind of the development of the Holocaust. But in order to understand the Holocaust, you have to understand the Black Holocaust. Anybody who will put down real Israel will suffer. So you have to understand why the Holocaust happened. For that, you have to go back to the black slave trade, which was started by these people who call themselves chosen, who are not chosen.
Now, when was this black slave trade began? What years? Do you know the years
it began from the early 13th century to the 14th century, and if you pick up Jewish sources, and there is much written on it, which the Jewish sources, obviously today rabbis don't want to talk about that because it's a black mark. So I have it documented in my writings where, for instance, Jewish sources state that certain people who owned ships, slave ships, they sent out ships to Caribbeans. From Caribbeans, from America, for instance, people were taken, indigenous Red Indians, they were taken into West Indies and placed over there. People were taken from West Indies and placed into America. Then we have people who were taken from Africa into Caribbeans, and the Sephardim were heavily into, they were businessmen, entrepreneurs. So they were into trading, into producing sugar, cane, cotton industries. All these industries were run by black people through these Sephardim. So the Sephardim would bring in slaves, and they actually inhabited Brazil. Brazil was where a lot of black slaves went into, and they had a real a business of sugar over there because sugar was very expensive to produce at one time.
Yes.
So it was capitalized by these people because they were entrepreneurs, they were businessmen, they knew how to make business, so they used cheap labor, and slaves, that's where slavery came in. Now, the Bible speaks about Israelites being put into slavery by a Gentile nation. Now, can you show me in an annals of history where the white Jews were enslaved ever in history by any nation in this country that we know of today?
No, but when was this? Where was this prophecy about them being put into slavery? Because we know they were into slavery. The Israelites were in slavery to the Egyptians for 400 years, and that's not the same as what you're talking about. Was that after that?
We're not talking about that one, Brian, at all. We're talking about slavery, which was foretold to occur much later than the Egyptian slavery. That wasn't and also for your information, the Egyptian slavery did not run for 400 years. The Egyptian slavery only ran for 86 years. All Jewish sources know that, including myself. So therefore, the prophecy that was given to Abraham only fits with American slavery. It does not fit with Egypt.
Okay. The American slavery, that was later than the 13th and 14th century, though. The slavery that we commonly hear about that was a couple hundred years ago. Is that related to this black slave trade of the 13th to 14th century, or is that a separate issue? I mean, we went to Africa,
absolutely right? Related to it, because it didn't occur later. It actually occurred during that period. But we have to understand that the Europeans who started the slave trade, they obviously took the slaves to Europe first. It was European slavery first, followed by the American slavery. So the American slavery came after, and the European slavery came first. Now, if you look at the prophecies, say, for instance, for argument's sake, let's look at one prophecy, Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 25, where it says that Yahweh
What book was that, Simon? I'm sorry.
Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 25. In there it says, Yahweh shall cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You shall go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them, becoming an object of terror, and shall be removed into all the nations of the world. Now, if we apply this prophecy to Israel, Israel has not really lost any war apart from the one minor defeat in 2006. But apart from that, Israel won every war. Yet Yahweh has said that if you disobey the Torah, you will not win any war. That goes against the grain of Bible prophecy. In other words, Israel winning the wars shows us clearly that defies what God has said. So because they are not the true people, it doesn't apply to them. You got to understand that. Whose home is the modern Israel today, really, at the end of the day. Not who claims to be what.
Okay, well then, the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war that many are thinking is coming up, and all the troubles going on in Damascus and Syria right now, even today, are these things related, to these issues? And do you think God is angry that these chosen people that you're speaking of are going to be kicked out of Israel? Are they supposed to be in that particular land?
No, I think things are building up in relation to the prophecy in Isaiah for Damascus. I think that we are not at yet this point upon that time where there will be a nuclear strike on Damascus, but we are heading that way for sure.
But what do you think is going on with we've seen the taking down of leaders in Libya and Egypt already, and it looks like Syria may be next. And
yes, you're right. Syria is likely next, because all of us know, who have anything to do with news and prophecy, we all know that there are certain nations behind actions in Syria. In other words, people who are called rebels in Syria are being paid and supplied by weapons from Western nations. That is obvious fact, number one. Now, number two, the reason for that, as you stated, is that they want to remove Syria's government and bring in perhaps a more pro-Western government over there. So far, they have not succeeded. Now, time will tell if they succeed or not.
The man who represents the Muslim Brotherhood just won the election in Egypt.
Yes.
do we think that that's going to happen again in Syria if they remove Bashar Assad?
I believe that, in my book, World War III, Salvation of the Jews, I wrote in that book that the Muslim Brotherhood will come into power because, sooner or later it had to happen, and we see it in front of our eyes now that they have come into power as, prophetically described. Now, if they don't come into power, how can Egypt turn against Israel? So it has to be a hardline Muslim government, and that is what's happening in Egypt right now. Now, the same way, what's also happening is that many countries are turning against Israel due to various reasons. The war that they are trying to brew up for Iran as well, that Israel is hoping that America will go and fight for them.
Right. But we've always been an ally of Israel. America has, and I think that if we're wise, we would continue to be an ally of Israel because I'm afraid we'll suffer the wrath of God if we turn on Israel. That's my personal feelings on that.
Which Israel, though, Brian? Which Israel side do you want to be on? The real Israel or those who are concocted Israel?
So you don't feel that it has anything to do with the actual country of Israel, that land, or is that land...
No, because the thing is very simple, that the people who inhabit the land today, the majority of the people in that land are not chosen. Now, there are chosen people in there, but they're in the minority. In other words, people who come out of Ethiopia, who they call the Falashas, people who come out of the Sudan, who they're now trying to throw out, people who come from, some people from America who are called the Black Israelites. These are the only chosen people in Israel. Now you start counting how many thousand they are. They're not in millions. They're only in thousands. So it's a remnant, very small remnant at that. And they're not even in power. They are treated as a fifth column, the people with no authority, no power. They're not given any status.
Okay, well, let's turn our thoughts to the Christian converts, how we always like to consider ourselves to be the spiritual seed of Abraham when we've come up under the Messiah and accepted the Messiah, and we are born again in the spirit of the Messiah. And so can we be grafted in according to this theory?
You definitely are grafted in. There's no doubt about that. But the problem is this, that you're supporting the wrong people. So just because you support the wrong people, it doesn't make them the chosen. You have to support the right people to receive the increases, the benefits in your life. Now, if you support the wrong people, you will not receive those benefits. You'll only bring wrath to your own nations.
How do we know who is the right people? I mean, is it all the black people in the world that you're saying are of Jewish descent, or just certain tribes?
No, not all the black people. Only the sons of Shem, not the sons of Ham. So it's very easy to recognize. The people that you brought as slaves into America, they are chosen people. That's the people you should first help. Now, the people that were ferried around into slavery from England, from Portugal, from France, into countries like, for instance, Tobago, Caribbean islands. Then you have Haisha. These are the countries. These are all Israelite chosen people. So if you are helping people, let's say in Haiti, you're actually helping Israelites. You need to remember that. That's where your increases are going to come from. If you're helping people, black people in America who were released from slavery, you're helping Israelites. So therefore, these are the people that we should be looking at in our own hometowns. They are the real Israelites. Now, if you were helping people, say in Jamaica, these were Israelites from the tribe of Asher. So therefore, you have to recognize who's who, and you're only going to come to that recognition if we allow God to speak to us and open our understanding more.
Okay. How do we know which of the black people in America are released from slavery? Is that pretty much most of them? I mean, I know we have people still coming in from other countries.
Yeah,
I mean,
pretty much, Pastor Brent, pretty much most of the people in America that I think there's about 15 million population there of these people, black people in America. These people who grew up in America and have been there for perhaps over 100 years, these people came out of the slave trade, and they are the real chosen Israelites. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind about that. I can prove their ancestry from Timbuktu to America. I'll tell you that for sure, any time of the day. And the people in Haiti, I can prove their origin. I can prove the origin of the Cubans. I can prove the origin of the people in Brazil. I can prove you the origin of every Israelite in every nation. And I can separate you the sons of Ham, and I can separate you the sons of Shem. So it's only a matter of applying the understanding that Yahweh has given me, the wisdom, and also the fact that you apply the biblical hermeneutics of who's who, and you look at people's races and where they come from, and look at the migration patterns, look at the histories, look at what Josephus says, look at what Tacitus says, look at what Herodotus says. These are the information that we need to look at, and we know who the real chosen are from there.
Okay, so this is quite an interesting theory, and I've had you on before, and so this is kind of kicking in little by little, but it's just kind of hard to grasp because it's very different than what we've known our whole life, and I think you can probably appreciate that.
I know it's very different, and it's a paradigm shift. If you do the paradigm shift, then you will start to receive the understanding. Now remember that in the book of Revelation, none of us are arguing about the book of Revelation being canonical or not, and we are told Satan has deceived the whole world. So tell me, which whole world has Satan deceived? Could the deception also be who the real Israelites are as well?
Well, I tell you, the longer I'm in this business, the more I'm amazed at the things that we always believe that are not accurate. So I'm definitely giving this some thought, Rabbi Simon, because this is, you mentioning here the second Exodus, you talk about the book of Enoch and the book of Jasher and the Apocrypha.
Yes.
These things were omitted, in the 325, as we mentioned earlier in the show, by Constantine and his people. Do you think that is there a lot in these books that speak of this, that back your theory?
Absolutely. There is information there that actually validates what I'm saying.
Wow. What about DNA testing? Has this done anything to prove your theories yet?
No. We cannot rely on DNA testing. Simple reason because we must have DNA of a real Israelite to test against. Now, if we don't have a DNA of a mummy, of a real Israelite, you can't take, DNA of Ashkenazim and say, let's match everybody to Ashkenazim. That's a falsified test. It's not a reliable test, and that's not one we would rely on either to identify Israelites. If you want to identify an Israelite, look at the nations that are in Africa and then start looking at who they were, because the word Negro in the ancient tongue was a word for Israelites. A lot of people don't even know that.
No, no.
No, that's what I mean. People don't know these things because information has been suppressed. And the word Negro, by the way, does occur in the Bible as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because, we read in English, we kind of, ignore these kind of things. And if we remember that when the Messiah was being taken for crucifixion, it was Simon who was carrying the stake with him. He was a black man, by the way, just as the Messiah was a black man.
Wow. This hatred, though, for the Jews, this anti-Semitism that seems to be rising up again here in the last 8 or 10 years, this is a lot of times, I think, geared because of the, as you mentioned earlier in the show, how that the quote-unquote, the Jews have a lot of the power with the media and the movies and the music industry, all these things But you're saying that could be part of the deception, that they're not really the Jews at all, and they're not the chosen ones.
What most people don't know, Pastor Brian, is this, is that a lot of these things are controlled from within. For instance, let me give you a small example. The Federal Reserve is controlled by European bankers, Jewish bankers, by the way. And your country, the reserves are controlled by them, by people living in Europe who are from Germany. You know, one of the famous families is the Rothschilds, the Red Shield family. Now, they also, the IMF and the World Bank has elite families in there who also are of Ashkenazi Jewish blood. Now, we know that the media, and we also know that the Hollywood industry is totally controlled by Zionist factions. Now, we know that the power of the AIPAC in America is tremendous, because they can shift the president's views as well, and as we can see what's going on at the moment. So we must never doubt that. And when we start to look back at history, and we start to look back before the German Holocaust, we start to find a systematic corruption in the fact where Zionists were involved in bribes, in corruption, in buying and selling people in terms of how to bring about the state of Israel. Now, you can't tell me that God needs Zionists and their money to bring Israel together. That's how Israel was created in 1948.
Yes. But you're saying, and that kind of leads into my next question about the protection of the land of Israel. They seemed like they've always, until recently, now we know they lost the Gaza Strip in 2006, I think it was, or 7 or 8. What year? That was very recently. But they lost the Gaza Strip. And but mostly there's been like a protection over the Israelites, you know. And like the 6-Day War in '67, they won that very handily.
No, Pastor Brian, I would disagree with that, because you're talking about propaganda here, not 6-Day War. Because what happened? Do you know the 6-Day War? Do you know no real armies fought in the 6-Day War? And you probably don't even know that one of the nations, Pakistan, actually took down Israeli jets. Have they ever told you that in history?
No.
Pakistani air jets fighting from Syria knocked down Israeli jets. They never tell you that in history. So this is why a lot of hyped up media about 1967, because 1967, not just 1967, but the Yom Kippur War as well, is documented to be a war that was orchestrated by America, Israel, and Egypt. It's documented by Russian observers, Russian diplomats, that they had fought this war trying to bring America back into the Middle East. This is all documented. So when people say 6-Day War and Yom Kippur War, no, they are not miraculous wars as such. When you want to fight a miraculous war, when you want to fight a miraculous war with a real army. Then I will see if it's a miraculous war or not, because Israel to this date has never fought a mechanized army in any country of the world. They have tried it with Pakistan and they failed. That's historically proven, because they tried to bomb Pakistan's nuclear sites with India, and they failed to do that because Pakistan's army had prepared to knock down Israeli jets from Indian soil, and they had threatened Israel that if you come to attack us after they had attacked the Osiris reactor in Iraq, Pakistan said that we will strike you in Israel with a bomb as well. So India at the time and Israel then decided to withhold that attack, that they were thinking of doing the same thing with Pakistan. The only country that Israel fears today is Pakistan, out of all the Muslim nations, and Iran. That's the only two nations that Israel fears. Israel doesn't fear any other nation because they know they can pretty much handle them all within the Middle East. The only reason they fear those nations is because they, as you know, in antiquities, Persia is a well-known nation, and Pakistan was part of Persia. Now, one has to wonder, why would God bring Persia to fight with Israel? See, that is all part of Bible prophecy.
Yes.
So the idea the Bible speaks about walls. Bible speaks about Israel without walls. So when you look at the Ezekiel prophecy of Israel without walls, one has to ask the question, what does it actually mean, Israel without walls? Because Israel has a wall today. So how can Israel be without a wall? So that's all part and parcel of God's end-time plan to cleanse Israel of the unrighteous beings over the earth.
So you're saying, too, most of the chosen people are not actually even in the land of Israel yet, and they're trying to deport 50 to 60,000 of them, but
Yes.
most of them haven't arrived there. What's all this Aliyah where people are flying in on planes and things? They're supposedly finding people from different tribes and different nations. Is that?
Yes. Well, Pastor Brian, let me ask you the question. Does God need your $300 to fly in an Israelite? Tell me the yes or no answer to that.
No, he doesn't. No.
Oh, he doesn't. So why then we would have to fund people when God has said himself, I will take you with my own hand? Isn't that clear that the Messiah is going to take those people in?
So they haven't arrived yet, essentially. Is that what you're saying?
No, they haven't arrived yet. And those that arrived, now let me put it into context.
90 seconds.
60,000 people, if they get kicked out, as is happening today, by giving £1,000 and saying, bye-bye, go back to your countries, what would happen to America if we started to do that in America? That'd be America empty. So let's apply that now to the prophecy side. Prophetically, those people arrived early. In other words, these are Israelites that came from Sudan, but they came from war-torn regions and they were pushed into the land. But God is now pushing them back out. Why? Because a war is going to come into Israel and cleanse the land and remove the unrighteous people there. Then they will come back in. So that's what people don't understand.
So they will be coming back in, and will Jesus be back at that time when they're coming back in? So that's after the second coming.
They will. Right. But this time, Pastor Brian, it won't be with $300 donations. This time, Yahweh himself will descend as Melech Yehoshua, who you call Jesus, I call Yehoshua, and it will be him who will take his people back in.
Wow. And when do you think that's going to occur? Do you have an idea with a timeline, what year that's going to occur, Simon, real quick?
We can only
10 seconds.
We can only calculate information that's given to us in the Bible. And what we can say is that we are getting very close to that time. We can't exactly say what the year, but the way the countries are working, the way the empire is shifting, we know that certain countries have to come into place. Certain things have to take place. Now, one of the prophecies in the Bible, which I doubt many people even ever look at, is a prophecy in Isaiah chapter 18, verse 1. I have never heard anybody speak about that prophecy in any great length. That speaks about a people, and that speaks about a land, and it speaks about the people of Cush. Okay? Now, that prophecy is today's prophecy. That prophecy talks about a nation coming up. It talks about a people coming up and then ambassadors going out. Now, these people that it's speaking about are North Sudanese and South Sudanese. Today, the two nations have split. In 2011, the split happened. In other words, we are now at the threshold of Isaiah 18.
Isaiah 18, okay, on the threshold. Yeah. Okay, I'll have to get into that one.
We are on the threshold of Isaiah 18. In other words, these people were described as black people, terrible from their beginning, because I don't know if you know or if you're aware, doubtful that you are, but it's good information to have, that Nimrod, the first ruler of the Cushite, a black man, but he came from North Sudan. That's important to know.
Okay, listen, the show is actually ending, Simon, but this has been very, very interesting, and I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm sure my guests do, and we may want to have you back on in the near future. My wife is kind of mentioning, but we'll get with you via email on that. But thank you coming on tonight and sharing with us some of this insight. This is definitely something we're going to have to look at, folks. So thanks again,